So welcome to Western Spirit, Scottsdale's Museum of the West. My name is Tricia Loscher, and I am the Assistant Director of Collections, Exhibitions, and Research at the museum. And I've been here since 2015. We opened in January of 15 after many years prior to of planning this museum on Western art. So we are, a relatively new museum, and we opened with, changing exhibits that were primarily all on loan to us. And then over the past several years, we've begun to acquire collections that have been actually gifted to us. So today we'll look at some of these major collections that we've received, and also some of the exhibits we've recently put together that are special shows that may travel on to other institutions, but they originated here with us. Overall, I manage the research, the collections, and the exhibitions of what's coming into the museum, whether it's from another institution or something that we actually put together in-house. Being able to show exhibitions that are coming in, I have to work with different collectors, let's say artists, museums, institutions, to find the pieces that we want to show and highlight. So that's one of the major areas that does take up quite a bit of my time. And our exhibition schedule is about 3, 4, 5 years out, depending on the gallery. So, like for example, right now, most of our major exhibitions our spaces are scheduled through 2024. So we really have to plan ahead, because, as you know, a lot of museums or wherever you're borrowing the work from, they need that kind of lead time. Because there's so much involved, such as loan forms, insurance, arranging the piece, making sure it's reserved for that specific time period. If there's ever any conservation concerns with something you want to show, those would have to be addressed, let's say, before it ever travels. So that's a large part of what I do. There's cases involved, those would, if we don't have them in-house, or if they're not coming with the show and we have to make them ourselves, you have to you have to factor that into the exhibition. So
and the lighting, you have to arrange the lighting for each piece.
Humidity controls, environmental controls. We keep our loggers, our data loggers, in all of the galleries on a continual basis. Anna Ackridge, who's the assistant curator here, she's responsible for downloading that information and doing the readings on the galleries to make sure the humidity and the temperature controls are accurate. Because if you're let's say you're the Smithsonian in Washington and you're going to loan to us, you'll want to see a report of what those readings have been, let's say, for the past year in that gallery before you even say you're going to loan, because you want to be sure that it's the climate and everything is safe of it. And then, of course, there's the research, the writing of the labels, the content development, what is the theme of the exhibition, what are the takeaways, what are you hoping to achieve with an exhibition, all of those things. Why have the show in the first place? What is the reason for the exhibition, and what are you trying to achieve, and who are the people you're going to be working with to do this? We're storytellers first, is what we like to say, and then we have wonderful objects and artwork that help to tell the stories about the greater American West. So we're not just Arizona or regional, but west of the Mississippi, including Hawaii, parts of Canada, and northern Mexico. So we have a nice large range of the American West that we look at, And in that manner, it really allows, as a curator, it's really exciting because it's unlimited, the things that you can do and curate and show and talk about. When you're curating, you think of ways that you can reach a broad audience and a broad interest, to tell these interesting stories about people and what they've done and all of their incredible accomplishments. And this is a really important space for where we hold our public events, speaker series. This will retract out as seats, and there was 135 seats behind us, behind that curtain, like theater style. The screen pulls, these drapes pull back, and there's a screen where we can show films and have PowerPoint presentations. As we started off saying, the building alone is phenomenal in its architecture. It's a LEED Gold standard. So first of all, like the cement we're walking on, everything is reclaimed. It's recycled. So in this space that is also used for private use, and let's say you want a conference and a great conference space, meeting space. It has excellent acoustics, and then the ceiling is also designed. All of this wood would have been reclaimed wood, recycled, and it's designed to mimic the shape of a saddle. So everywhere you see, there's some kind of little, feature that relates to either something in an exhibition somewhere, as we'll see later, or a design element about the American West. And right now this show will actually close soon, but it's a show about Arizona Highways magazine and images that photographers throughout the years took that were in the magazine. And 12 artists were chosen to create paintings from one of their photos, whatever they chose out of any of the issues from the time that Arizona Highways first began. So this photo here, this artist chose to paint for this exhibition. These works are for sale, some have sold. Studio Ma designed the building. This sculpture garden is made to look like, this mimics the ribs of a saguaro cactus. So that's one feature there. And then we have sculpture by a number of some of America's most recognized bronze artists. We have John Coleman, and we have Allan with the gone dancers, the two dancers, and Bruce Green with the cowboy fiddler. So we really built Nebuchadnezzar with this wonderful bronze that you see over here, which was a recent gift to us. The cowboy is looking for the deer, and then the horse is seeing the deer, but the cowboy doesn't realize that it's right below him. This is like the really colorful one by Bob Houses from New Mexico, and to the left of that, Melanie Yazzie, her wonderful sculpture there. This ponderosa pine that was 9,000 pounds originally. It was felled. It had some kind of like a bug issue, and so they took care of that, but what they did was then turn it into this beautiful sculptural bench for us, and carved and sculpted and lacquered the bench. That's another wonderful feature. We call it the weeping wall, and what you see is it's part of the LEED Gold standard plan, and when the like say water condenses on the air conditioning, it will flow down that wall. It comes through and it flows down that wall into the bio well right there that you see with the rock on it, and sometimes that'll be full of water. It's really amazing. Even in the middle of summer, that will be running. And then it will water any plants, like it goes underground and waters the plants out in front of the museum. It's part of the design by Studio Ma, again thinking, you know, of the environment and, you know, saving and conserving water and resources. And then the tooling right here that you see, this design, is another feature I was referring to that is, you know, from one of our exhibitions. This design is taken off of a Western saddle, so the tooled saddle design, and then they recreated it here in the cement, and there's some of this out front as well. Here, this metal is all to look like it's starting to transform and change, and again, it speaks to this idea of transformation of the American West and how everything is constantly changing, and you know, as it starts to kind of, you can see like the rust coming down and seeping into the cement. So it's really an amazing you know, thought that the architects put into, you know, all of this, even including the way that it's situated. The entire museum is built around this outdoor area. When we do exhibits, it's like move walls and change things. So for every exhibition, we can configure depending on how we want to lay it out. You know, all the walls are on wheels, so we can change the layouts real easily. This is a show that we just installed and opened in October on Edward S. Curtis. He was considered one of America's most important photographers. He documented Native American people from around the late 1890s up until about 1930. He put together what was called the North American Indian, which is this 20-volume set of books. And in order to do this, he traveled all across the western half of the United States to these regions, photographing and interviewing, recording songs and ceremonies. So there are also wax cylinder recordings and other things that went along with the 20 volumes that he produced. So it was an enormous ethnographic project. It is one of the largest Edward Curtis exhibitions to date, one of the most comprehensive in that it includes many different kinds of mediums that Curtis is, you know, sometimes not even, people aren't even aware of the different mediums that he worked in. So there's like silver bromides, gold tones, photogravures, which was his biggest output, which we'll see, and you know, platinum prints, many other kinds of prints. And this map shows just a kind of a general idea of the tribes at the time that he visited, which were, you know, more than 80 Native American tribes that he photographed and recorded. You know, as I said, like their stories and songs, and the different regions, like the Great Plains he visited, Plateau, the Northwest Coast, Great Basin, California, and he loved the Southwest. He particularly loved the Southwest and visited that several times. And you know, you have to think the time he was working, he was also trying to market and keep his, you know, his sales going, because these volumes were what he sold subscriptions to. So in order to continue this project, not only did he have to sell subscriptions to the volumes, but he had to get funding, and he looked to people like J.P. Morgan, who was hugely instrumental from the very beginning, from the inception, to fund his work, as well as President Theodore Roosevelt helped back him. He did not die a wealthy man. It was pretty much a struggle the entire time, because the cost of the project was so enormous. So everything that he made or received from subscriptions went directly back into funding the project. He was inspired by, he moved to Seattle, Washington as a young man, and he was even younger, you know, in his teens, he was very fascinated by photography, which, you know, then still was a fairly new medium. and he made his own camera at an early age, and then he also was inspired by the Native American people in the region of Washington and Port Orchard, where he lived, where he first moved to with his family. So he started taking photographs, and one of his first was of Princess Angeline, and she's the daughter of Chief Seattle, who Seattle is named after. And he would see her, down by the shore gathering mussels and clams, and he photographed her, and this is one of the iconic photographs of Curtis's time. That's about 1896, right before she passed away a year later. Circa 1895, and she passed in 1896. He was also a mountain climber, and he was on the top of Mount Rainier. This is really before he started his project, and he was climbing, and he noticed a group of climbers who were struggling, and he was afraid that something was going to happen to them. So he, there's a long story that goes with this, but anyway, he ended up meeting George Bird Grinnell and some scientists of the day that were very important and instrumental, and then introducing him to other people such as eventually Theodore Roosevelt and other instrumental people along the way. So he was very fortunate in several instances. Early on, he was in the right place at the right time, and it started to open up, his world, so to speak, his entree into these other people who he was then invited to go on a trip up to the Sundance in Montana with George Bird Grinnell and photographed the Sundance in 1900. And that's when he realized that this was, he wanted to document and preserve and for posterity the, quote, vanishing race, which at the time was sort of the mainstream ideology that the native peoples were vanishing. And of course we know that's not true today, and it turned into many different stereotypes, that have come out of that. But it is something that he felt he was doing as part of this project to photograph and document. Then we have different processes, like the photogravure and a copper plate, for example, that shows you, this is the plate from which the photogravure was made, and this would have been part of the set that went out. There was the portfolio set, which was this size of photogravures. This is one of the examples, the wax cylinders that Curtis would have used to record sounds and music on. And if you scan this with your phone, it takes you to Indiana University, and they have the collection of recordings that Curtis did. And you can actually hear one of those play, one of the sound recordings. We have the 7 regions like Great Basin and Plateau and Southwest. And so with each volume, then we highlighted within volume 6, for example, of those 20 volumes, the Pagan, the Cheyenne, and the Arapaho. And we did a layout, see on the map where this is located and within the United States, a general idea, and then the descriptions of all of the pieces, either the portfolios or the actual, the books, the 20 volumes. Copper plate right here would have been put in here, and that way they knew that this was the cover and that was the plate that was inside. So we do have a few of those very rare copper plate covers. And another interesting thing, he took the print of Calling a Moose, and then you can see how he cropped it and did a detailed shot for this plate cover. 7 regions are focused on in this area, and the majority, and then when you come into this section, we have the Northwest region. He visited the Alaska region, which was volume 20, and the last region, the last area of the country he went to. And then a section that talks about after his volumes, what he did, which is also really fascinating. He went to Hollywood and he worked with Cecil B. DeMille. He was a still photographer on movies like The Plainsman and The Ten Commandments. He wrote a manuscript on gold panning called The Lure of Gold, and we have a copy of it right here, which is incredibly rare as well. This is the last photograph known taken of Curtis right before he passed away at the age of 84. The Battle of the Little Bighorn, and interviewed people that had been scouts and other Native American people that had been at the battle to try to understand exactly what happened. His claim was that Custer did not, could have come to the aid of Reno much sooner and didn't, and so we have this map that Curtis did of the battlegrounds, and he walked it back and forth and talked to the Native Americans who had been involved with that. So then we have some of his material. He did in 1914 a very early film on called In the Land of the Headhunters, later renamed In the Land of the War Canoes. And so this is considered by some as one of the first or the earliest documentary on, about Native Americans, and he worked closely with the cultures and of the Northwest Coast, and he, did all of the filming, and photography, and it's endless. And then he also was involved in the lecture series that he took across the country, and what was called the Picture Opera Musicale, where he actually had a symphony playing, and he would show these lantern slides to the audience, and some of these would be like 1,000 people at a time, and he would sell tickets, and this was one way he was trying to help subsidize his project and make money. These glass slides that would have been shown, projected, and then people would have seen these while a symphony was playing, and then he'd give a lecture on, let's say, visiting the Hopi at the snake dance. We did not produce a catalog for this show, but True West magazine published an article. Actually, the whole issue was dedicated to Curtis, so that would be an issue that kind of serves, I guess you could say right now, as a catalog for the show. And they had multiple authors and perspectives on that, which is really nice. This is sort of where we laid out the techniques and the materials more so. The first section that you just viewed is really looking at the plateau regions and the 7 different regions, and breaking it down, as you saw, with those layouts and cases. In this section, though, we start to focus more on the kinds of mediums that Curtis used, like platinum prints, silver prints, and then highlighting some of the people that Curtis was very involved with, photographing and working with, such as Medicine Crow, Slow Bull, and some of his really iconic works that you'll see in this gallery as well, like Three Chiefs Pagan, one of his most famous. And then Tim has a really great eye for wanting to compare, what kind of mediums you're looking at. So, for example, this is a platinum print. We have a platinum and another platinum, and then over here a silver border print, and then an albumen on gold tone printing out paper, which is also quite rare. He did sales shows. He had exhibitions. He marketed his work, in various to various people, his clients, that he worked with, and he did a lot of photography early on in his studio of like the social lights of Seattle before he even started photographing in the field and working with Native Americans and going out to where they lived. So I think he just was often experimenting with the different mediums, and depending on, if it was he was selling it, if it was, they're what are called his Masterworks, like his platinum prints. And, many are very, very rare. There's only a very small percentage of each because the majority of his work was made by the photogravure process. Mm-hmm. So it was using that copper plate and printing it and reproducing it all for the volumes. He had 3 different kinds of paper that he used, and I'll show you a display on that. So you have to think too about how the medium, the print printed on the paper. Here we have some of his gold tones, which these are on glass. So if this breaks, then the whole piece is gone on this one. This is an albumen. This is a platinum. He did not come up with the medium of gold tone, or it's also called an oro tone, and he gave it the name Kurt tone. That was developed a number of years prior, but he was often experimenting with it and trying to refine the method. So if you see when the light's on it just right, it really shows that gold. And then we have like examples of his picture frames, especially for gold tones because of the way that they were made. There was a special frame or frames that you could choose for a gold tone that he would put it in. And this is showing some of the many different frames that have so far been identified. There's butterfly frames, there's bat wing frames, pie crust frames. This is Princess Angeline. Again, this is a gold tone, and if the gold tone, if that breaks, then the whole image breaks because it's printed, her image is printed directly on the glass. Rare, these little miniature sales samples that he produced. And then right across this wall, from here is a really good view of, again, the copper plate and then the photogravure. So you can see how it translates. Paper and platinum and silver prints. Again, very, very rare pieces. This talks about the platinum print that he made, and then the cyanotypes, which are fascinating too. Now they're very rare, but there was probably a cyanotype for just about every image he ever photographed in the field because it's kind of like a blueprint. He could document, change it, figure out what he wanted. It was, kind of the contact print that would give him the idea of how he wanted to maybe change his image. So most of these were thrown away, as you can imagine. So that's why we know they're very scarce today. 3 different kinds of paper: the Japanese vellum, the Dutch Van Gelder, and then the Japanese Gampi or tissue paper. And if you ordered a subscription to the volumes, you could choose what kind of paper you wanted to print on. So, and one would be, let's say, more expensive. I think it was the Japanese tissue that Roosevelt and Morgan had their volumes printed on. In this case, showing some of the glass plate negatives that are backlit, so you can see them. This is a great example. Walvia, you have photogravures, copper plates, glass plate negative. This is a gold tone in the bat wing frame. He had a studio back home, and his family helped to run it. He and his wife ended up divorcing because this project was a huge financial strain on him and his family. So tragically, they did divorce, but he had children and daughters and a son. So he really, kept the business going with friends. He had editors for the volumes. He was not the only one on the project. There were many involved. So the gold tone photograph process. This shows you some of the materials and the pigments that would go into producing and making a gold tone. Then more photogravures in gold tones all the way down. And each volume is laid out. And what you see up here is the symbol. In each volume, Curtis had a symbol in the intro. and so this is Alaska, that's volume 20 and 19 and 18, on and on, all the way down to 1. So we used that symbol in the other gallery when we also showed the different, like volume 6. We matched up one of the designs for a volume. We matched up and we found in a photograph of a basket. So we know he took that design from a basket. They're both very famous photographs, the Peaky Maker. And Nampeo was very famous, considered the matriarch of Hopi pottery, working at Hopi around 1900 in that time period. And Curtis met her, photographed her, and it relates really well to this exhibition because we also have Nampeo's beautiful pottery in our show, Canvas of Clay, and we have 7 generations of Hopi pottery in this exhibition. Hers was collected, by scientists and museums and railroads and collectors, and she became famous, and people would travel just to Hopi to meet her and purchase her pottery. So she's world renowned today. And then her daughter Annie and Fanny, her daughters, continued on making pottery, and we have some of their pieces in this show as well. And then she has also influenced countless generations of Hopi artists. So we, as I said, the newer generations and the 7 generations are throughout this exhibition. And this was gifted to us, so this is our permanent collection. The mural is by Jerry Jacka. It was I think the first color mural or color photo for Arizona highways that he did that really launched Jerry Jacka into fame. So that's of Walpi. And then we have like these wonderful cylinders, and we talk about the history of the Fred Harvey Company, and how like these vessels take on the form of a vase, for flowers, and they would have been sold, in stores like Fred Harvey Company. And we also talk about kind of the tourism, the tourist trade of the American West. And then you have the more recent, real fine art pottery pieces, contemporary by people like Allan and Jean Sami and Rainy Naha, with detailing and showing like celestials, the skies, and astronomical features on that pot. The way that we designed it was to be able for everyone to see it all the way around, because often that it tells a story in motion, and like there are bird wings and feathers, and birds and butterflies and moths. And these are the pot by Nampeo's daughters. This is called the migration pattern, which is the migration pattern is something that only the Nampeo family uses. So there are specific patterns that stay with a family, and like if you're outside of that family, you would never paint that. So there are artists, today that are carrying on that are from the Nampeo family that paint migration patterns on their pots. We did an interview with Dr. Cooke, the collector, and we have that on the video.
Where he stands out.
He's talking about the Nampeo pot that's in the case.
She has fingerprints in there where she pushed out the pot to make it a broad Sikyaki style pot. I mean, this is a magnificent piece. We looked at it from the side.
We work with a videographer, Reese Candy. He's an award-winning videographer. This is the 8-Hay Spirit of the West collection. And you can see, hi Tony. Again, all of the saddles. We have Porter saddles and Visalia saddles. And Abe Hayes, the collector, started collecting about 50 years ago now. at least. California spurs and Texas spurs and saloon items, prison-made gear. So it's really quite a range. Revolver holsters and quirts and whips and, you know, different things that relate to horsemanship and cowboying. So it's really, it's a one-of-a-kind collection. You can look up the date they were made, who made them. Sometimes it was collaborative, like someone would make the leather work and someone else would, you know, tool the leather, and then someone else would do the silver design. Some of the most rare and sought after saddleries and people who were making works like Edward Gavalia and Visalia, and just it's incredible, the range and the dates, and you know, from the 1800s into the early part of this century is when he was working. We have saddlebags and different kinds of hats. This was a gift to us, so this was another gifted collection. Western section back here, Western town, featuring more like the prison-made gear. Prisoners like Walla Walla, Washington, made some of the bits, and Abe tracked down, they have numbers on them, so he did some research and he was able to identify in some cases who the prisoner was that made it. The beautiful horsehair, that's very fine woven horsehair material that he collected, also made by prisoners. Saloon kind of objects, card holder devices if you wanted to conceal cards up your sleeve, roulette wheels and Western cards and mugs. And this exhibit was installed before the museum opened, so we had to actually do the layouts and planning and measurements and put it into a SketchUp computer model for the entire museum to do the first exhibitions, because we didn't have the actual physical space yet. It was still being built. So we had the blueprints and the dimensions, and then I worked with our designer and we did the layouts that way, which was really, really interesting and fun, you know. And then when it finally started to get installed, it was like, oh, you saw it on a computer all this time and now you're inside of it. All of it has to be laid out and designed, and the casework, and it had to fit with the Western town, you know, and its dimensions, and it was a really fun and interesting and intricate process. This is a fun three-dimensional mural. The way that if I stand here and I position my hand, it should look like I've got it on the horn of the saddle, and it should come out like there's like at least 30 different positions you can be in to make it look dimensional. Like we have more than 7,000 movie posters and lobby cards, and it's a joint ownership with the ASU Foundation. And so this is a tribute to Renard, who passed away. And so we have this gallery and the next gallery with his posters, and some are very early. One of the first posters is 1898. And then they go all the way up to more recent times, like the early 2000s. He was a law professor. He was the dean of several law schools. He was Osage and Cherokee, Native American. And so he had an extremely interesting perspective of reading and, you know, critically looking at Western films and posters.
We try to, well, first and foremost, we try to bring things in that are directly related to the collections, such as the Curtis books and the Curtis prints. And then we try to shop locally and, you know, within the Western United States, to try to get unique items in here that you're not going to find in most any other place.
Tribes such as the Nez Perce and Lemhi tribe and Shoshone, and they're just incredible. They would have been worn by cowboys and in fancy shows and parades. You can see all the wonderful, there's animals and horses, and you know, there's bird designs. Some have like American flags on them. Others might be roses and flowers and floral designs, but just a wonderful collection. Edward Olin saddle, who's known as the maker to the Hollywood to the Hollywood stars, maker of saddles. This is all silver parade saddle, on loan to us by the Arizona State Fair. One of his Western paintings for the moon. He worked in the West and he lived in the East. He, as I mentioned, worked with NASA and went with the astronauts to the moon, or recorded the astronauts before they went to the moon. So we can see some of those sketches. This is a recreation of his studio. And the family was quite involved with this, helping us recreate this along with Tim Peterson, who, as you know, also was instrumental in the Curtis exhibition. That was his sweater that he used. It's quite an easel too. He would use different props in his paintings. He also did a lot of graphite drawings. So this is fun because it shows the different ways that he would use his pencil to create his lines and his designs. This gallery that really sets out his early career and what he did and the kinds of illustrations that he did, such as medical illustrations. He also designed posters, How the West Was Won, famous movie with Henry Fonda and Jimmy Stewart and many others. He designed that poster. This is kind of talking about his early years. And his work with NASA and designing the postage stamp. He designed many postage stamps. Yeah, he was with a program with NASA too. That helped sponsor him as an artist when he was working on the project with NASA and documenting the artists like before breakfast and when they were having breakfast and suiting up in their suits. And these are his quick ink sketches literally on the spot when he was working with the astronauts, and he would clean his brush up here and then keep on, his pen. He'd clean it and then keep on doing his ink drawings. So these are like some of the quick in the field, so to speak. So we have this whole section is dedicated to the space art. He also did illustrations for magazines on sports. He drew President Kennedy and Nixon and some of the covers for Time magazine. So his son, Paul Kelly's son, is also an artist, Chris Calle, and so we paired up some of the father and son's work on this wall over here. And this is Chris Calle, so you can see how much like his father he really is. It's pretty incredible. We have the bridge connecting, so this is like more contemporary work that we tend to show on this side. Western, and then the other side is the more historic and what we're going to see at our Courage and Crossroads exhibition. One of the artist explorers, many of his beautiful engravings. And this exhibition is kind of set out like a chronology, starting with 1804 and Lewis and Clark. When we first opened in 2015, we had a show in the Great Hall where you saw Curtis on the Lewis and Clark expedition with paintings by Charlie Fritz. So this is kind of starting off talking about Lewis and Clark. This is a very rare pipe tomahawk that was found in the collection of Lewis when he passed away and handed down from generation to generation. We have some robes, Native American robes, beaded, or actually quilled medallions and beaded blanket strips, shields. And then it kind of continues on, work by Alfred Jacob Miller, and the early part of the 1800s and throughout this section, and then talking about the trappers and the mountain men as it kind of continues on around into this area. Moran pieces. Here's a bronze and then a watercolor, and then we have an oil on canvas painting, and a pen and ink. So you can, again, kind of like with the Curtis show, see how the artist was so skilled in working across mediums. And then Frederick Remington, we have the watercolor, the oil painting, the pen and inks, and then the bronze. And more beaded pieces, a girl's dress and a woman's Apache dress. These 3 chiefs blankets that are also extremely rare and in very fine condition. We have a first phase, a second phase, and a third phase Navajo chiefs blankets.
So when you say phase, what does that mean?
That's just designating the period in which they were woven. So this would have been early part of the 1800s. Now you're talking more the mid and then a little bit later in the 1800s. And you can see how the chief's blanket starts off as kind of just bands of design, and then it starts to slowly integrate more design elements in the center and on the corners. And by the time you get to a third phase, you start to see the serration of the diamonds and the bands and the colors. We have some of their paintings, a group that organized in the early 1900s, and they had one woman artist that was a member of their organization, right here, Catherine Critcher, one of her paintings, and they worked in Taos, New Mexico. Very instrumental group. Some of the artists, like E.I. Cows, their images would be used for calendars, like Fred Harvey calendars, and this is a good example, like the pottery decorator. We did a whole show on the Taos artists a few years ago. I co-curated that with Peter Hasrick. So this is, again, some pieces that from Tim Peterson's collection that were in we did a large retrospective show a few years ago, this was a couple years ago, and we had, that again was one of the largest Maynard-Dixon exhibitions ever mounted to date. You know, starting with chronology and a timeline and some of his very first pieces, like a sketch that he did of his grandmother that he sent to Frederick Remington asking for advice, you know, and he's like, keep it up. And so, you know, all the way up to murals that he had designed for the U.S. Department of the Interior.